Well, hello and welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Stephen. So, the blog this week has to do with what I was doing over the weekend. This previous weekend, I spent 3 days at Camp San Luis Obispo doing some of my military service. I was with about 21 other officers. Most of us were JAG officers, although we had two chaplains and about 5 medical personnel that were also involved. And what we were going through was it's referred to as a BOC or a basic officer course. It was absolutely fascinating. We were dealing not so much with, drill and things like that. We were really focusing in on the internal workings of sort of how we manage things in the military. Trust me, I will not bore you with those details. Over the course of 3 days, we did 40 hours of instruction, so you can imagine how physically exhausted I am right now. That being said, with any training, you get little nuggets of knowledge that end up being more valuable than necessarily what the presenter was trying to get across. One of those little nuggets, and there were a slew of them this weekend, but one of the little nuggets had to do with the concept of training. It came to us from a chief warrant officer, and he said something that I thought was absolutely brilliant. He said, "Every day is a training day. Some days are emergency days. A training day is something you can schedule. An emergency day happens without schedule. So you're training for the possibility of having an emergency. If at the end of the day it turns out you had no emergency, then congratulations, you had an adequate training day. But if you don't do any scheduled training, then inevitably you're going to have that non-scheduled emergency and you're going to have a disaster." Anyways, I thought that was a really interesting articulation of the absolute necessity to be constantly training. A lot of times we hear people griping in the military, why are we having to load an airplane with a bunch of garbage only to unload that airplane at the end of the day? Well, the reason you're doing it is that you're training for a quick loading of that airplane. Turns out that there was no emergency, there was no need to load the airplane, so now you have to go through the unload procedure. But had there been an emergency, then you've effectively loaded the airplane and prepped for it. Anyways, a fairly simplistic concept, but I think it has greater implications. So, as always, if you have any questions about the blog, or you just simply want to contact me, my email is steven@artemishq.com. And as always, train constantly, train consistently, and train with purpose, just like my chief warrant officer said we should. And above all else, stay vigilant. Until next week when we have coffee again together, stay safe.